So welcome back, everybody. This is the second session. Yes, we're talking about why things are not ideal, not really the way we want to see them. And I've given it the title of What Gives Rise to Conflict. So through this understanding, again, it's not simply approaching issues or things which are calling out for peacemaking or resolving conflict. There are ways to do that. There are university courses you can take, to understand conflict resolution, and there are many people more versed in this and more able to do that than myself, certainly. And even then, somewhere, that's not our purpose here. It's to look a bit deeper. So I'm going into some of these religious traditions as well to see, is there something really valuable, as it says in that song, to kind of find and bring back, into the present day that we could use. So reality is tragically very different from the ideal which we were painting earlier. We have a world of conflict. It's being brought to our attention increasingly, day by day. We acknowledge, or need to acknowledge, that we have two purposes in life. These are not contradictory purposes by any means, but there are two purposes that should work together well. One is the purpose for our own lives and our own well-being. The other is the purpose of our lives in relation to others. And this is Father Moon speaking in the 1970s. To our family, our nation, or the whole world, there must be balance. If too much stress is placed on individualism, then collective virtues are lost. Love of nation, brotherhood of the people, family integrity, relationships between parents and children, and finally, even the value of individuals themselves. These things get lost when that balance isn't right. So this is relating to the topic we had earlier, which was living for others or living for the sake of others. That's very related to this pair system and its healthy development that we talked about. And I exist in a relationship with the whole, my whole community, world, environment, everything. I exist to benefit the whole, actually, and that's a higher purpose in life. So if I'm latching onto that, I'm very much in tune with the kind of principles of the Creator in that way. So if an individual lives, and just pictured any individual, it could be me, living within the kind of totality of the whole, we're not independent, we're interdependent creatures, as we said. So if I live for the whole, then actually, naturally, the whole comes to support me. It supports the individual. So this way of life, even though there is a feeling that you're maybe going to lose something, actually you won't. That's a smokescreen or a paradox. You won't lose. Rather, if you're giving to the whole will support you. Cause of conflicts comes when this is not working well. If, as an individual, I'm basically self-centered, and I have less regard for a higher purpose in life as a result of that, the main purpose is me, then I'm starting to think that others exist for my benefit or should exist for my benefit. That diminishes or even ignores the value of the whole. So rather than that individual comfortably within the whole, giving and being supported by the whole, it's like this. It's expecting the whole to support me in a very unbalanced way. And that's quite simplistically put, but does it ring true to you, this kind of circumstance? Yeah. So there have been ideologies which have justified conflicts, and we've been through a kind of experimentation of that, so with 70 years of communism in the last century, and the kind of effects of that are still carrying on. So this is Father Moon talking in the 1970s about this. He said, according to the logic of communism, there will be constant struggles as long as there are classes of people. But in our ideology, and it encourages those struggles actually, thinking it's for a good purpose, but in our ideology, which is what you're hearing today, right, in unificationism, there are no class differences, but only family relationships. Here there is no discrimination. There are no people above or below, but only the relationships between parents and children providing order in the family. So we may think sometimes, parents, children is like this kind of order. And it might even be used by a Marxist writer to say there's oppression. The family is a means of oppression of people. No, it's not like that. There's an order, and to have order is actually right and proper and of benefit to everybody. So that is what we see in the family, but actually each is living for the other in that circumstance. He goes on to say, according to communist ideology, mine is mine and yours is mine. It's a summary. On our part, we must think mine is yours and yours is the nations, and the nations is the world's, and the world's is God's, and God's is mine. The spirit of unification must be greater than the power of communism, in practice, in hope, and in ideals. Both start off as having kind of ideals or goals in that way. But this, as you see, creates a much more harmonious, cyclical, self-supportive system, right? Which makes a lot of logic internally. The reality of human nature is like this. We have a selfish nature that's very well developed in many places. Some they have much less than others, but still, human, what we sometimes call human nature. You heard that expression? Where people say, oh, this person acted in such a greedy way or a violent way. It's just human nature. We are saying, no, that's not human nature. That's an aberration. That's something gone wrong, actually. But in this circumstance, we do have inherited anyway a selfish or self-centered nature, but every person has an original nature, which is relatively undeveloped, but nevertheless, you could identify that with the conscience or something in each person which you can speak to, even in the most wayward person, a person who's quite difficult to deal with. They'll have something in them which it's the remnants of the conscience, right? They may not want to listen to it, but you can find a way to touch them. Really, that needs to be developed. So there's a problem here within the individual, or you could say within the mind of the individual, right? I know I characterize it as a relationship between mind and body, and that's how often it works out. We can perceive it that way. But in the end, it's a problem in the mind. There's a self-centered mind, and there's a mind that wants to do good for others. But which has the upper hand, right? That's the question. And this is another point which is well supported by the religious texts of the world's religions. So I've got some different quotations here for you. The conflicted self, here in Sikhism, in the Adi Granth Sahib, it says, whoever proclaims himself good, no, goodness approaches him not. It's always like a little bit of kind of poetic language, isn't it, in the English? But I'm sure you catch the meaning of that. As soon as you start saying, well, I'm good, why isn't everybody else like me? This is probably an indication that you're not, actually. Right? So it's a very risky thing, and that's a kind of thing you can trip up over in the religious life. People become confident. They think they're better than they are, actually. Hinduism, you have this expression, the mind is twofold, the pure and also the impure. So there are two minds, in a sense. Or the Native American tradition. I love these. It's from the Mohawk tradition. Every person has both a bad heart and a good heart. And Christianity, you have writings of St. Paul. He said, he's talking about himself, right? I do not do the good that I want, but the evil I do not want is what I do. This whole chapter is him agonizing over a kind of inner struggle. We don't quite know what it is, but obviously he wasn't satisfied. He wanted to love people in an unconditional way, maybe, but he found actually something pulling against that, some self-centered concerns or concerns for his safety or this kind of thing. I think, such a holy person was not a bad person in any way, but it's often the road of the person who's really pursuing a devout life, right, of prayer, of meditation, maybe as a monk or nun or something like that, and whatever tradition, they will be, as they become purer in their mind and heart, then they discover more inside themselves that needs to change, right? It's like, you didn't notice that, but now it's coming out, right? This kind of idea. So I looked around for the person who looked most conflicted, and I came across this chap, right? Conflict in the mind, right? So simply put, we have some selfish thoughts, words, and actions. They often come immediately to us, and it's the body dominating. It's those concerns that are attached to the body, pulling us in an evil way, whether it's desires for money or comforts or sex or food or these kind of things, leading us that way. But every person, as we said, has a good heart, right? As well as a bad heart or some original mind. And that is pulling the person towards or through more unselfish thoughts to the side of goodness and, actions and efforts being led really by the original mind. So our situation, what we can call the human condition, and again it's quite universally recognized in religion in particular, is there's a battle in the mind of each person. That battle in the individual, that's what's manifest. That is what manifests in struggles or conflicts in the family, and then it emerges in the society, and then in the world. So really we have to trace everything back to the situation of the individual. Now, I know full well, if you're dealing with a conflict situation between nations, you can't get everybody to go back, in their own minds to a much better state. But why we're teaching this is because largely UPF is an educational organization. And we're promoting a lot of things, including like character education, which deals with this. We have a large project underway in Nigeria. We've done things within the movement in after the collapse of the Soviet Union in Russia and in China and places wherever we were free to do that. We have a program running even in Palestine, actually, in schools. So, there is educational work, but also, understanding this is important for peacemakers. Understand the problems that come from individuals and the way the mind works or doesn't work well. Religions have stories, and even you could say cultures have stories, because it goes beyond religion. Origins about where conflict comes from, and there are certain clues in these stories. Like all myths, they often contain something of profound truth or eternal truth in them, and intuition or insights about the human condition. Many are metaphorical, but surprisingly universal. And if you analyze these stories about origin of evil or origin of conflict, they often relate to the misuse of love, especially sexual immorality, which is an interesting point because it's quite universal. Here are some of them. This is why I'm saying this. From the Uttaranga Sutram, which is a Jain text, it says, "It is better to die than to indulge in partaking of forbidden lustful pleasure." That's quite strong, isn't it, right? It's better to die, right? You have in Buddhism, in the Dhammapada, the man who goes to the wife of another, you can guess with what intent, right, digs up the very roots of life. It's very profoundly disturbing and upsetting, to all concerned, everybody affected by that unfaithful action. here in the Holy Quran, do not come near adultery, for it is shameful. It's a shameful deed and evil, opening the road to other evils, a kind of gateway evil in that respect. Here you have in Judaism, in the Talmud, which is the commentary to the Torah, written by various rabbis over the years. It's talking about the Garden of Eden story, which you might or might not be familiar with, but it's an explanation of how evil came into the world. What was the wicked serpent contemplating at that time? He thought, I shall go and kill Adam, the first man, and wed his wife, and I shall be king over the whole world. Somebody seeking to dominate others or come out on the top of the pile, as it were, through this kind of domination, through sexual immorality, misusing that for that purpose. And here in Hinduism, it gets even more. I have to say to the ladies, this is not me speaking this, I'm just quoting this. Formerly, all creatures were virtuous, and by themselves they obtained divinity. Then women who had been virtuous became wicked witches, and Brahma filled them with wanton desires, which they in turn inspired in men. He created anger, and henceforth all creatures were born in the power of desire and anger. Wow, interesting, isn't it? Do you want more? I've got a couple more. This is from Sikhism. Sexual desire is the window. Pain and pleasure are the gatekeepers. Virtue and sin are the gates. Or St. Paul again in 1 Corinthians, flee from sexual immorality. He who sins sexually sins against his own body. Of course, it does damage to others, but you're also damaging your own temple, your own self, your own holiness or your own image of God is suffering because of that. And so think about it. Think of the consequences, not only to others, but also even to yourself. Interesting, isn't it? How universal this is. So Father Moon delved very deeply into, starting really with the Genesis story, that was his entry point. But through his spiritual experiences and his questioning and his encounters in spirit, then he really discerned some very important things which happened to be supported by this story. So it's not like we have to believe in this story, or it's fine from my point of view if we just treat it as myth or something which is there in our culture. But nevertheless, in as much as it gets down to the root of a problem, it's very interesting to drill down and look at that. So that's what I'm going to do now, if you don't mind. The basis of the story is that our first ancestors, they're named Adam and Eve, were in a garden, idyllic garden, and they were free to eat of any of the fruit of the trees that were there. So it's a kind of, no restriction, except there was a commandment saying, voice of God to them, saying, do not eat of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, for in the day that you eat of it, you shall die. The prohibition is death, meaning, probably more logically, a spiritual death, a kind of cutting off from our source and that original purpose in God. But there's a clear prohibition given. Don't eat of the fruit of that tree. And of course, it's a tree with an unusual name, isn't it, right? It's not a regular tree. So even though there are various, people like to interpret this as literally, a fruit of a tree, Father Moon's understanding is not like that. In fact, I'll give you the conclusion first, right? Because this is not such a theological exposition. So his conclusion, and it wasn't come too lightly, is that this fruit, which is prohibited from being eaten, is actually love itself. It's representing love itself, especially the holy husband-wife relationship. That means our first ancestors should grow, like according to that first blessing or first foundation of peace, to their own individual spiritual maturity first, to learn how to love, because love is a very powerful force, right? And then, on the basis of their own kind of maturing to such a point that they can, under God's blessing, enter a marriage relationship, that will be fruitful as well. And that's where the fruit comes, right? So it's not a bad metaphor, I would say, right? Because to know, tree of knowledge of good and evil, to know in biblical language is to have sexual relations, right? There's a little Christmas story there which says something like Joseph was betrothed to Mary, the mother of Jesus, but he did not know her. Well, of course he knew her, right? They were close families, but it meant he didn't have any sexual relationship with her. So, of course, when a baby comes along, what's he going to think, right? So, this is how the word was used. It makes me think that probably when this story was first shared, which is maybe 3,500 years ago, it's a long time ago. It's been with us. But probably it was very well understood for what it means for its audience of the day, right? But we've put layer and layer and layer on this, right? So even major churches will say when asked, was this referring to a sexual sin? They'll say, no, it wasn't. It was just a disobedience or a turning away from God or something, which is all true. It was those things. But this is going deeper. Do you follow me? It's actually exposing this. It's an uncomfortable thing to expose, right? Because it means something about love has become corrupted. Also, it's a good metaphor because to bear fruit is to produce a good result, isn't it? That's a kind of meaning. And, the fruit of this relationship, of course, is children. It's building a lineage. So a lineage comes out of this, and we want to be a good lineage, passing on a good tradition. And that's where the next generation is going to learn from and inherit from. And these concepts we've covered already in our first lecture, right? So, yes, we can say, well, or rather we might consider, is it a test of obedience solely that? Not really, because who or which loving parent would test their children in such a way with something that would cause their death, something tempting. No, you don't tempt your children and then punish them because they give in. That's not a parental love, actually. Also, this fruit, whatever it is more desirable than life itself. So the prohibition was, or in the day that you eat of it, you shall die. So what could move people more than that kind of concern? It must be nothing other than love itself. People will die for love in a good way, for love of country because of necessity or to defend their family. But also if love is, they're totally besotted in love and it's unrequited, they might consider taking their life or ending their life because there's no love in their life or they've been hurt in this area. So love is a very powerful force in the universe. We shouldn't just think it's a simple construct of the mind. So it's portrayed, whatever this is, as being essential to fulfilling life's goals. So that's why his conclusion was this is to do with love itself. So if you then kind of look at the story this way, the green sections are like natural growth that a human being should go through. So Adam and Eve or our first ancestors were growing, but only reached a certain point of their development, especially spiritual development. During that growth time, they were given a prohibition not to eat, during that time of growth while they're immature. That makes sense, doesn't it? It's largely what we've inherited and what every parent will do. They'll say to their teenage daughter, they'll be concerned. What time are you coming home? Who are you with? What are you going to do? This kind of thing. It's understandable because we want to protect this special aspect of love, especially in a young growing person. But it's where we're most vulnerable. That's where people get most attacked. Through not obeying that commandment, not listening to it, rather than obeying and being free to eat and enjoying the kind of fruits of that spiritual maturity and marriage blessing, they fell to a kind of area where love is not working properly. It's outside the realm of God's creation. Here's Father Moon explaining that. Back in 1995, he said, "What is the reality of our world today? Disorder and sickness of every kind, including war, violence, and drug abuse, have infected humankind. More important, the rapid collapse of sexual morality among the young and increasing divorce rate and breakdown of the family are all destroying the foundation of human society. All these things originate from the fall, from this original time. Right? So that's a kind of conclusion. And that's also why I added that little caveat in the beginning. Not everybody's life works out as they want. Some people are single mothers through no fault of their own, or they have children who get in with the wrong crowd through no fault of their own, really, So I'm not making any judgment on the situation. But also, if we don't wake up and realize this, we are missing something so essential, actually. We need to talk about this. We need to have a conversation about this as a society. Do you remember the definition of true, genuine love? I'm not going to test you, but just think, what was it? Unconditionally caring about the happiness of another person. This is just one that I've settled on as one I like at the moment, right? I think it works. So, what is conditional false or imitation love? Because there is love and there is love, right, in the world. There are, love can masquerade as the true thing when it's not. It's a very self-centered love. Well, false love is defined, I think, helpfully this way. I care how you make me feel. Right? It's all about that. It's all about my feelings. That's the inherent self-centered nature of it. I care how you make me feel. So this is why some people, they are always looking for this falling in love aspect. Right? And even in terms of serial relationships, they may have quite a serious relationship with somebody, but it collapses and then they're out looking for somebody else because they love that feeling of falling in love. But that's not all that love's about, right? That's a little mechanism to help, bring the right people together. And then, you shouldn't worry about that, right? So this becomes the important thing for people because I care how you make me feel. That means if I perceive that you don't love me, I don't love you anymore, right? Or if you are particularly angry towards me, then I don't love you. So one day I can love you and the next day I don't love you, right? It's a very fickle love, isn't it? So I care how you make me feel. And I'm not only talking about romantic love, because love should be for all relationships that we're in, every relationship. So even parent to child, sometimes a parent, they're well-meaning, but they might only express love when their child comes home with good grades or good marks from school, right? And the child will be aware of this. That's why, you're such a good little boy, a little girl. Thank you, you're wonderful. Let's call up Granny and tell her, They only get praise when they're doing well, but when they're not doing well, they get a kind of cold treatment. That means the parent is thinking, I care how you make me feel. It's more about, that feeling. Do you follow me? Mm-hmm. So even in that relationship, you can make this kind of mistake. Of course, parents have to, discipline, guide, correct children. That's part of their job. But you have to do it without any self-centered feeling. It's not because you make me angry. That's not the reason. Because I want you to be better. I want you to avoid difficulties in your own life. This is why I'm saying it to you. So you have to say it with love, actually. Even be quite strict with love. But it's necessary, isn't it? So this is, I think, helpful distinction between these two kind of qualities of love. A lot of people only grow up knowing this kind of love. They do not experience, it's a tragedy that that's the case, they don't experience true unconditional love or parental love. So that's what they're learning. That's what their experience is. That's what they're going to replicate in life. That's what they think it's all about. So it's very tragic. And that's why sometimes it's interesting to see the process of where people have a profound religious experience. because they feel for the first time there's a source there, which I wasn't aware of unconditional love that loves even a person like me, who's a bit of a wretch, And that is life-changing for people. They don't want to do what they were doing before. They want to be different, So it's an interesting process, very real process for people. Change, or in religious terms, we often call it rebirth or experience. Here's a quotation from, I'm throwing in a few other teachers or sages, right? As you notice. This is from a writer called Eckhart Tolle. Anybody come across him? Yeah, I admire his work very much. Wonderful speaker. I went to hear him talk in the Methodist Hall here in London. From one of his books called A New Earth, Create a Better Life, he said, what is commonly called falling in love is in most cases an intensification of self-centered wanting and needing. You become addicted to another person, or rather to your image of that person. And in the falling in love stage, then the person is putting on their best image, right? They're not really, you're not really seeing the true person. It has nothing to do with true love, he uses that expression, which contains no wanting whatsoever, no wanting for yourself. Interesting, isn't it? Yeah. People are coming to this conclusion through different routes, That's why I'm very optimistic about, we're in desperate need of a real spiritual revolution, right? Along these lines, just as we've had or are having with, external scientific, technological side of things, which is wonderful, but we need it now, and it will come, a spiritual revolution, because, and it's going to be different to anything before, because it's not coming from one organization or one group or anything like that. It's almost like a shift in consciousness and a shift in an awakening, almost like another stage of evolution for humanity, you could call it, right? So, do you remember the conclusion of the first lecture? That was way, way back in the morning, before lunch, right? Remember that? Yeah. We had this, 3 foundations for peace, right? Individual peace, peace in the family and society as a result, because it's the building block, and universal peace with nature and the world around us. So this was our conclusion. But because of this mind-body conflict and the misuse of love, we find that the first one becomes somehow the mind and body are under what we could call evil influence. It's a distorted picture of the original, and it sets them kind of on a more self-centered basis and a reason for existence, and that produces a selfish person, right? Largely, right? Then, if that person who is spiritually immature and they haven't learned how to love in the right way, and then they get married, they bring that person into the marriage, right? And maybe under the first, months or years of marriage, it's very rosy and very beautiful, and they're very much in love with each other. But soon that person's self-centeredness is going to come out, and that's going to cause a problem. And it could be from either partner or from both. It starts to rub against each other. It's like they almost have slightly conflicting purposes. I'm living for myself. Well, I'm living for myself. And then it creates disharmony and fighting and arguing, and then you lose trust, and there's no basis for love in a genuine way. So this is what we have inherited, unfortunately. In some families it works very well, and I'm always amazed how in the world there are so many good people who just try to make the best of life, right? And they're doing a great job in difficult circumstances. But as a society or community, we need to revisit and learn these things. So we see, as a result of this, conflicts in society and in wars. It comes from that same divided self in the individual. And this is an important role of UPF, is to connect the family with world peace. You can't talk about world peace without talking about family, and you can't talk about that without talking about the individual. right? So it's making this connection, even though it seems like a lot more work, right? We wish there were a quicker way. No, this is what has to be addressed. And then we see, as a result, there's environmental damage. The way the nature is suffering, it's because of human beings' greed or self-centered, exploitation, because they're not thinking of the future. They're thinking just about the pound in their pocket. They're just making, things good for themselves while they can. So it's going to bring a bad result if you live that way. So this is what we have to sort out as humanity, actually. We have to sort this out. Here's a little section which talks about this idea of evil influence, because that's maybe a kind of new territory for some people, but it's an explanation, a study course on this unification principle. It says there, to state that the world is under evil influences is to suggest there are negative spiritual forces operating in our lives. Such influences can affect a person only as long as he or she cooperates with them. It's like you're having a kind of mental conversation with them or allowing them to influence you. Sin is a very religious word, right? But picked deliberately from religious vocabulary. Sin may be thought of as an act or thought which violates God's law and which inhibits negatively our own growth to perfection. Our own perfection, this kind of spiritual maturity we were talking about. It's working against that. Sin is thus never simply against God. It's also against our own self, in that it violates our own deepest essence. So it's how to get back to the true essence, the true humanity in each person, and allow that to blossom and to emerge. This is really our challenge, right? It's a big challenge. So through his analysis of this story and his spiritual experiences, Father Moon concluded, again, I'm kind of shortcutting to conclusions, right? So if you have questions, then it requires further kind of study or explanation. But he came to a very useful, I find it personally very useful, understanding of what is wrong with the current state of human being, right? We say who's inherited a fallen nature as a result of this loss of position and status. Then he identified it as four kind of aspects. The first is failing to take God's standpoint, particularly in loving other people. We don't put ourselves in that kind of position, like a parental position, and love other people accordingly. I judge people from my own perspective, which is very damaging. There's a tendency to leave one's proper position. Each of us has a particular role in a family, in a society, and often people don't want what they're given, they want something else, or something that someone else has got, or they want to take over a certain role or position. And that's a tendency. These are all like tendencies which have come through this original mistake, very deep down in the origins of our history as modern human beings. The third is a tendency to reverse dominion, to upset the kind of order of things. And the fourth is to multiply like a criminal act or some kind of wrongdoing, to pass it on, to get others involved in what you're doing. That all sounds very theoretical, doesn't it, right? But I liken it to falling downstairs, right? Have you ever had that experience where you're just, maybe in the night you're on the top step and you just trip over a little bit of carpet, and before you know it, you could be rolling down 2 steps and hitting your head on the wall, and if you bounce off that, maybe you continue rolling and you bang your head all the way down until you get to the bottom of the stairs, and as you're passing, somebody is carrying a tray of glasses and or a full tea tray, right, ready to bring up to you, and everything breaks loose, right? So it's a kind of descent into chaos, really. But somewhere, this nature that we have is a little bit like that. We're always trying to hold it in check. And really, we have to overcome it. It starts how? With a self-centered viewpoint, right? So, to put some bones on this, imagine there's an office. I'm sure a lot of you have worked in an office. And everything's going along happily, but then a position opens up, a kind of senior position, right?
Everybody wants it.
And let's imagine at least two people want that in the office. They think, definitely I'm the person for this, right? I'm definitely the best person available. Another person thinks, I'd quite like to have that job as well. I think I could do it quite well, I'm ready to put my name forward, and they have a more of a kind of humble attitude towards it. They're thinking, well, if I'll just try and get on and do my work as best I can, and if somebody asks me and they recognize my good work, then maybe I get a promotion and I'd be very grateful, right? Other person is a little more scheming, right? This is where the fallen nature is coming in. So it starts with a self-centered viewpoint, but that's something in the mind. You couldn't tell if I was having a self-centered thought right now, could you? You wouldn't know, right? You can read minds. So I have to be very careful in front of Margaret, because what I'm thinking, she knows everything. But, it starts there and it's not hurting anybody. I mean, you can say it hurting yourself a little bit. It's at least taking some of your energy away from what you should be doing. So it starts in the mind, and this person might be thinking, well, definitely I'm the best person for that job. Right? It's like the person who, in a committee, you have a meeting, and they always have the best ideas, for sure. That's their opinion. Yeah. Always my opinion is best, and they're almost grumpy or angry if others in the committee follow someone else's idea. Right? Sometimes your idea is not the best. Right? That's why we do things together. Right? We need that. So. Anyway, a person can be very kind of looking at everything from their own eyes in a self-centered way. If you do that, you're starting to neglect your own responsibility, because you have a job. This person in the office has a job, and they're probably putting a lot of their thought into how to gain an advantage over the other candidate and how to bring them down eventually. So they're believing themselves to be better than others. This is at the origin of racism, of all kinds of, nasty kind of aspects of human nature, isn't it, right? You kind of think, well, of course I'm the best, or of course I'm better than others, or superior in some way. And then this gets turned into action, actually, because maybe that person in the office starts to put down that other person in order to win favor for themselves. So they send a little message around the office saying, do you know what that other person, what they said about the boss? Don't tell the boss, will you, right? But they said this. They spread a little rumor, right? And of course, knowing and hoping that will get passed on, right? And eventually reach the ears of the boss. So people start to do these little machinations, little things, which is really getting turned into action now, because it starts to cause harm to others. Somebody's going to be hurt through this. If you spread a rumor that's not true, somebody's going to be damaged. And that person may then go around others trying to get them on their side. Put a good word for me in with the boss, will you? Because, remember what I did to you, how thoughtful I was, or this kind of thing. All kinds of strategies there, sometimes intimidation, sometimes a little bit of pressure. So all this is going on, and, the world is much more than that, of course. That is a simple thing I'm describing here. But the process that's uncovered here is very, very insightful and very helpful. It leaves that person feeling justified with what they're doing. They're getting others to do their dirty work for them. And, they're even rewarding people who help them along the way. So they're kind of becoming like a center of beneficence themselves. It's very, very much abusing power, and it's disrupting relationships. So this kind of thing happens clearly, right? And in religion, it tends to be that we had the word sin before. Sins are really often talked about in terms of one-word concepts. It could be like lust or greed or anger, unrighteous anger. It might be qualified because some anger is good, right? And then this is, the only way to really pass that on is through stories, largely. That's the proven method, because a dictionary definition is not enough to change a person's behavior, right? But this is kind of showing how these things arise. How does anger arise? How does jealousy arise? And it gets under the skin of that, which is, I think, why it's very important. Here's Father Moon on unity of mind and body. He said, as long as fallen nature remains with us, history will always be riddled with struggle and turmoil. And this will be the case no matter how much we may sing of our ideals or cry out for peace. This is why we conclude that we will not find the path to peace until we have pulled out this fallen nature by its root. The way to world peace does not lie far off at the ends of the earth. Rather, it will be found only in the place where each of us is able to unite our divided mind and body. That really brings it home, doesn't it, right? That connection, which might be kind of a new way of thinking to us, but actually, when you look at life in the great religious traditions of the world, it's very much to do with this. It says, unlike the kind of materialistic view, which says the problem is out there, we have to change society by force, and then we point the guns at the people and have them, obey, and we eliminate dissenters. No, religion has always said you have to start with yourself. You have to start in your own heart, and you have to go through that process and become a better person, essentially, right? So this was kind of rather beautifully expressed when Mother Moon, Haktahan Moon, came to Europe, actually, this time without her husband. He'd passed away. And she came to Vienna and spoke there. The title of her speech was Peace Starts With Me. Peace Starts With Me. It was a kind of big campaign. It had a huge, stadium filled with people. Very wonderful and exciting program. But she spoke on this topic and others, and under this title, which sounds kind of catchy, modernish, but no, actually, it's an age-old truth, which is upheld and practiced by the world's religious traditions. That is, peace starts, first of all, with myself, with sorting out this damaging conflict or state of conflict between mind and body in myself. And I have to have them work together, centering on a common purpose, which comes from the Creator. Everything which is, I'm using a little clicker here, right? Everything which is created by human beings is created first with a purpose in mind, right? Because I want something which can just fit nicely in the hand and which will, move the slides along, either back or forward, right? I want to be able to do that. So it's all fitting the purpose, and it's coming from an invisible place into a real, substantial place. So everything around us, pretty much everything, is designed, right? With this kind of process behind it, even the building that we're in. So, this is nothing new in that respect. But in terms of overcoming these problems and bringing peace in the world, peace does start with me or the individual. Yeah. And notice that even in religion, we don't say it's not you that's the problem, right? Which is tempting to do, isn't it, right? Having given you this explanation, you'll see fallen nature in everywhere you look, right? You'll be, but don't become an expert in finding it in other people. Become an expert in finding it in yourself if you can, right? And there are big barriers to that. There's a biblical verse which says something like, you will deceive yourselves, which seems like, from the psychological point of view, a bit strange, isn't it? People try to deceive themselves, but they do, right? We do. We try to deceive ourselves. I'm much better than I actually am, or I know what's right, or, it's a kind of self-deception. So we have to question, and we have to embark on this kind of journey if we're not already well on that journey. Thank you very much, everybody. God bless you. That's the end of the second session.